All right, we are back here talking New York Mets baseball. Join me today to break down what's gone wrong for the Mets and whether they can turn this around this season here. Great friend of the podcast. He runs the Apple NYM blog. He is the host of the Simply Amazing podcast. Tim Ryder is here. Tim, how are you?
Doing great, Mike. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming on here. And obviously, like myself, you're following the Mets very close this season here. What's your general takeaway on what has gone wrong and why the Mets are sitting 39-46 as we talk right now?
Well, what has gone wrong? That could be a very long conversation. I'm not even sure we could pinpoint exactly what's gone wrong. To generalize it, I think it's been underperformance. I mean, we saw, the meat and potatoes of this roster win 101 games in 2022, and even with most of the same faces around, and granted there have been some changes, but it doesn't look like the same club. The resiliency hasn't really been there all year. And again, you have to point to underperformance and, looking at the back of guys' baseball cards and saying, well, this doesn't look like the same player. When Tommy Pham was leading the team in weighted runs created plus in July, it's a red flag considering the aspirations this group had.
Yeah, I think for sure. I think we all would have said last year if we gave us all true serum in April, said, 101 wins probably not going to happen again, but I don't think we had them in line for like a 75 win pace or roughly where they're at right now. The crazy thing is, I think for me, apart from like the pitching is the biggest issue, but like the thing surprising is like the lack of fundamentals that this team has sort of lost the last month, and B, like sort of like how Buck Showalter and everything go right at this point last year. I feel like every move he's made has gone wrong for the most part at this point.
Well, as good as a team might be or as bad as a team might be, if you're going to have any success or if you're going to be a disappointment, whatever the case may be, a lot of things have to either break your way or against your way or whatever the case is. And yeah, it's been, black and white considering what the Mets were afforded as far as opportunities last year and took advantage of those opportunities and such, and what they've done with opportunities this year, whether it be, leads late in the game, whether it be surmountable deficits, whether it be just poor decision making on Buck's part, which we've seen a lot more of this year than we noticed or I guess harped on last year because things were going so well. But I guess in the last week we've seen a turnaround and there is a light at the end of the tunnel, but things have to change considerably to take this group. And it's tough to say it, but to take them seriously, they're going to have to prove it at this point.
Yeah, they will here. And obviously, things got so bad that Steve Cohen had to come out and talk to the media, which is something we never would have seen under the Wilpon regime. But Steve Cohen comes down. He's preaching patience, says, I have a long-term vision here. I can't overreact to a bad couple of months here. But anything interesting you took away from what Cohen had to say to the press last week?
Disappointment. I don't think you can get too far into how detailed that disappointment is or what the immediate, plan is, considering you're, at that point and still at this point, you're still around halfway of the season. You're not mathematically eliminated. You still have a decent roster on paper. It's tough to say, okay, well, this is what we're going to do. It was pretty much just kind of echoing everyone's sentiments. And, I think that's the nice thing about having, the owner of the team you root for also being a diehard fan, is that, they're suffering the same feelings that we are when things aren't good. And they're going through the same, I'm sure with a much more innate view on how things or why things are going the way they are. But, he's in the same boat as fans. And I think it's tough for anyone, manager, general manager, team owner, fan base to really explain, the feelings of what's going on right now. I mean, we're Mets fans. We're used to disappointment, but the expectations and I don't even want to say pressure, but generally just the expectations that were attached to this club. What else can you really say than what he expressed is, wow, like this is really bad. And yeah, we have a lot of options on our table, but being able to say, this is what we're going to do at this point is, it's a very slippery slope. They could rattle off 9 of 10 over the next week and possibly, be right back in the mix of the wild card in the National League. But, it's such a small sample size. Like maybe they just got hot. Maybe you're going to miss opportunities to go and make some moves that might build up the future of this organization and help a turnaround happen a little quicker than it might have if they're just going out and spending money. There's so much to it, and I think that the way Cohen took things was measured and honest, and as honest as things could be, considering the situation the Mets are in right now, where things aren't dead, but they're on life support, and a lot of moving parts are going to come along with where they stand over the next few weeks.
Yeah, I think my big takeaway I noticed is how he still had the long view of I want to build the organization this way, and I'm still trying to attract baseball talent in the front office or et cetera to come here. And my idea is yes, I'm a fan like you, but I can't go have a temper tantrum and fire my entire front office and field manager if I want to attract the best of the best to come work for me. So I did appreciate that from Cohen.
Oh, absolutely, especially when you're courting someone who's potentially been on their minds for the last few seasons in David Stearns, and adding a president of baseball operations, it could put everything else in line. You feel like maybe there is some sort of disconnection or disjointment between departments or just the vision, and maybe starting from scratch front office wise and utilizing the such an immensely added to staff as far as your analytics team, your operations team, all of the baseball side, the business side, everyone pulling in the same direction is going to help. And Billy Epler, for all of his ups and downs in this game, he made some decent moves, but he also made some really, really, disappointing moves, and most that could have been predicted. You have to look at the Darren Ruff, J.D. Davis thing and be like, what was going on here? But things are going to change. You have to be pretty certain about that at this point. I'm just hoping that that vision that Cohen's talking about, that you were just referring, is going to be enough. And plus, of course, the capital behind it, the vision, the not really accepting failure. Well, we'll have to see how they react to this season and how this season ends. But, how they react to this season is probably going to be also a really, really big part of drawing in, whether it be front office hires, whether it be free agent signings, whatever the case may be. How they react to the immense disappointment that they've experienced so far, whether it be the rest of the season or into the off season, what they do now is going to say a lot about where this organization is heading. And I think, fans, players, front office alike, if you're a Mets fan or have any rooting interest in this team, or beyond that, you have to be hoping for some sort of life, because it gives everybody a better idea of where things are heading after this. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I know what you mean here. I want to talk about some of the on-field stuff as well here. So I think the thing I notice is that in terms of the rotation, I think the big number here, I think every Mets fan should be aware of, and I'm sure most are here. After last night, when Max Scherzer goes 6 innings, Mets are 24-4 when the starter goes at least 6 innings, and they're 15-42 when they don't. So that to me is the key to season turning around here. And in terms of rotation, obviously Max Scherzer and Verlander are starting to pitch a little better. Senga's been pretty consistent. Carrasco's up and down. Quintana's on the way back here. How do you feel the Met rotation right now as we head to the break?
Incomplete. You have seen some ace level stuff from Max and Verlander, sporadically. You would like to see that more consistently, of course, but you have to be happy with what Sang has been able to do. Trying to piece together that back end, whether it was Peterson, McGill, or Casey had a spell up there, and now with Quintana coming back, it might give that group some more stability. I happen to think that Sang is just getting better as he goes on. I think he's getting more comfortable. I think he's adapting to the baseball, the physical properties of the baseball, which I'm sure wasn't really spoken of a lot. I guess early on it was, but what was it, a blister or something he developed? But I think the comfort level is there, and I think that if the Mets are going to have success in the second half, Sang is going to be a big, big part of it. And I'm hoping that Jose Quintana can be that back end, number 4, number 5 type guy that the Mets were hoping he would be. Carlos Carrasco, having the stability of him when he's right is such a plus for the rotation. It kind of pulls everything else together. When he's not right and he's a question mark, which, more often than not has been the case for him, it's very tough for the Mets to find that continuity, continuity. The same way that you look for, connecting at bats through a lineup. On a bigger scale, you almost want that same thing from the rotation. Somebody falls off one night, you want the next, the guy going up next to be able to pick it up, and especially a veteran in Carrasco's spot. That should be part of his MO. And I don't want to put it all on a number 4, number 5 guy, because everyone else has to pull up their part too. But, connectivity and synchronicity and bringing stuff together and working off of everyone else and picking your other guys up, it's going to be an integral part to any sort of success the Mets might find over the last, 3 months of the season.
Yeah, for sure here. And obviously, one guy's been on the microscope is Buck Showalter here, because obviously he's made some curious choices over the course of the season, whether it's bullpen magic and points to that game in Philly. A lot of times where he's, playing for tomorrow, playing the long game when the Mets need wins, or the fascination with guys like Daniel Vogelbach getting prime spots in life and we're not producing at the expense of younger guys who are. Like, what do you think about what Buck has been doing this year?
Well, I guess, it's kind of to echo what we were talking about earlier. Last year, Buck made some questionable decisions last year, but they mostly flew under the radar or were swept under the rug by just, wins after wins after wins. You tend not to focus on these things. And I think Buck's tendency to go with veteran guys and we got to get this guy going. He's always been that type of player and kind of avoiding young guys. That's always kind of been his thing. If you remember back to Bernie Williams with the Yankees, who eventually turned into a very, very good, major league player. Buck Showalter, he was basically on Buck's, do not play list for the first couple of seasons he was around that organization. And, no manager's infallible. And these are humans making decisions, and not every decision is going to work out. But yeah, this year, it seems like the worse things have got, the more frantic Buck's decisions have got at times. And especially that whole bullpen mess where he's, you have to win a game and you have Robertson and Ottavino available, but you just decide not to use them and then use them the next night. Some of the decisions have been, of course, justifiably harped on, but some of them have been just as mind-blowing as, I guess you understand where he's coming from, but it's just, why? Why take the chance at some of these spots? I'm glad that they're getting a little bit of action out of Vogelbach, or were for a while. He's starting to hit the ball. He's really looking like he's focusing less on walks and more on driving the ball, and that's always going to be helpful for a player of his profile. But again, it comes back to guys just underperforming, and it's going to be on the manager to get the most out of the guys. I mean, that's the manager's job these days, is to motivate a whole room of men to unify and get something done. And it just seems like there's so many missing links in what you're trying to do with a 27-man roster. And yeah, I guess that falls on leadership, and it's not just decision wise. You have to wonder what's going on inside that clubhouse too.
Yeah, and I also want to talk about Billy Eppley here. Obviously, he's been beaten up by the fans for his offseason. I mean, some stuff has worked out well for him. David Robertson was a good pickup. Tommy Pham has been picking it up of late. Justin Verlander is probably the correct choice of the 3 options they have at the top of their rotation. But you look at how he constructed the bullpen. I think that's where he's warrants the most criticism here, because his idea that he was obsessed with the optionable bullpen arms of we're going to have fresh arms in the back of the bullpen to make sure that we have options throughout the year. But the problem with that philosophy, especially when Edwin Diaz went down, is they left them very thin on the top end. And you could tell the way Buck Showalter is using guys. He hasn't really had a lot of options he trusts back there.
Yeah, well, it's tough. Losing Diaz so close to the season, of course, you're going to have to scramble and see what you have, and then maybe pivot if you have to really bring someone in if you can't hold down the back end, which was the case very early on. We saw, oh man, Robertson's doing great. Ottavino is not the same guy as he was last year. Rarely was hurt. The Mets are going to need some actual additions if they're going to keep up with this bullpen, and they just never came. And don't get me wrong, Dominic Leone's been great. There's been some nice additions. There's guys who've been, very useful for periods of time, but these are the major leagues, and guys are going to get a book on them, and you can't expect. I don't want to label these guys as replacement level players, but stat wise, most of them are, and it's very tough to get anything going to the level that this organization wants to get things going with replacement level players. Billy Epler, when he realized stuff wasn't working with the bullpen, yeah, you might have to overpay in a trade, and you don't have a lot of trade capital to work with unless you're moving some of your higher end blue chip prospects, which you're not going to do that for a reliever in May. Unless someone's really, really going to put you over a barrel. Like if Cincinnati wanted Brett Beatty for Alexis Diaz, of course you're going to say no, but you have to look around then, especially if you're still in the mix. Like you look back to that Atlanta series. This is probably beginning of June. The Mets were still less than a half dozen games out in the division. And at that point you're playing with an understaffed roster and, looking at the bullpen, looking elsewhere. There's so many pivots that Epler and his staff could have made, and if they just never came, and that's alarming. That's alarming to me.
Yeah, I'm sure we'll talk about Epler more in the future. One thing I think that's helped this team a bit is the rookies. Obviously, Francisco Alvarez and Brett Beatty have done well for the most part, especially Alvarez, who set the Met rookie record for homers by a catcher yesterday. But the thing I don't understand with this organization, I think it's also might go back to Buck a bit, is like how beginning of the season, like Epler purposely did not really do a big offensive splash in free agency. He figured these kids would be contributing at some point. But when they did, it was a lot of times, you're platooning with Tomas Nido or Eduardo Escobar. And in the case of Mark Vienna's never really got an opportunity when Vogelbach was not swinging the bat at all. Like, it just doesn't understand. It's just something I feel like this organization really has to look at in the long view, and especially in terms of player development. We've seen the articles about what J.D. Davis had to say over the weekend when he was up here about his time with the Mets. Like, they need to do a better job, like, making sure these young guys get up here and actually get acclimated, as opposed to, like, not starting half the time for reasons.
Yeah. Oh, I think we saw it with Vientos. Like, you had him up here for a few weeks, and you really didn't do much with him. And, the reason that you're bringing these guys up is to get them ready and prepared for what hopes to be a decent major league career. You can't say these guys are all going to have long careers, but that's what you hope for. And, what you're doing by bringing someone up and sitting them on the bench and you're just going to watch, you're starting their development. And that's harmful to the organization long term. And whether that was Buck's decision, whether that was the front office's decision, they didn't add any power this offseason because, one, you're hoping for Vogelbach to be that guy. You're hoping for, I think everyone was looking towards Alvarez to hopefully be in the mix later on. But, at this point where you have power potential in Alvarez, and now he's playing and now it's showing it, you have at least doubles potential in Beatty. You could probably pull one out if he wants to every now and then. Ronnie Mauricio, who's been playing his tail off for the most part in AAA this year, his power bat's developing well. And Mark Vientos, he's got exit velocities that are on par with Pete Alonso's minor league exit velocities. And even while he was here, he was hitting the ball really hard when he made contact. The Mets have if they wanted to infuse power, and especially now that things aren't looking as crisp as they once were, you have the option to just, knock out two things off the list in one shot. Bring up these kids, get them all the experience that they could possibly get over the last 3 months of the season, get them prepared to be, considerable pieces in the 2024 roster and moving forward. Like, it almost seems like they don't have trust in the decisions that are in front of them. And he who hesitates is lost is a really, really good quote, because it seems like the Mets have hesitated at almost every juncture this year. And what have they done? They have lost. So, you put it on the players for underperforming, but you got to put these players in the best position to succeed. And whether it be Buck or whether it be the front office, it's been a lot of wait and see. And that's just, it's not what you expected for a team with so many high hopes going into the year.
Yeah, that's for sure here. So let's go both positive and negative. I'll start with the negative because that's what they've given us most of the year here. So we saw the Mets already make a trade when they sent Eduardo Escobar out. They paid all his salary down to bring in a couple of prospects on the Angels that they actually wanted here. So if the Mets do end up deciding to sell here, what do you think they actually are selling? Is it just the guys on the end of their deals? Do they listen on a Scherzer or a Verlander? What are you thinking?
Oh, you have to imagine that FAM is going to draw some interest. You're probably going to have to be paying down money, but I assume that Canna or Starling Marte would fit onto a contender roster, even in a bench role. But again, Mets are going to have to pay down money to get anything substantial. David Robertson, I absolutely see getting dealt. It would, of course, leave the Mets shorthanded on the back end. But if they do go that road, David Robertson's been lights out in the postseason since like 2016. I think he has like 2 earned runs total, and he's played for, I want to say, like 3 or 4 different postseason teams over that span. He's been amazing. He's definitely going to draw some interest. Adam Ottavino, again, he was a terrific part last year. He's been inconsistent at times this year. I would assume if the Mets pick up some money, he's movable. The Max Verlander thing, you don't want to blow it all up because, again, you have a team with a decent core next year, and having a front-endish starter as either one of those guys would be, even towards the end of their career, would be helpful. But, somebody might come to you, and say, oh, I'll give you all this for Max Scherzer. I'll give you all this for Justin Verlander, and you only have to pick up half the money. It's very tough to say no to that. So, one, you got to see where the Mets are at in a couple of weeks. 2, you're going to have to see how this market's going to play out. People are going to try and take advantage of the Mets because they're not going to have much leverage. But if the Mets can turn that leverage around on the teams that are interested, hopefully contenders with very deep pockets prospect-wise, pitching prospect-wise, I should note, then, this is going to be a chess match. And I just hope that this front office is equipped to not get, blown out of the water battleship style.
Yeah, I think the challenge of the Max and Verlander, even Marte to a degree, is just the money. Because I know Cohen says he's willing to pay money down to get returns here. But with how much these guys are making, is a point where you wonder here. Cohen will say, like, does it make sense for me to pay that much money to get them off my team when I could just still get something out of them on my team? That's, I think, the balance you have to weigh there.
Well, I think with Scherzer specifically, who has an opt-out after the season, he has the no-trade clause, which he's waived in the past. He did it just a couple of years ago to go from Washington to L.A. I would assume that there's some wiggle room there, just because, all right, let's say he agrees, yes, I'll opt out at the end of the season. The Mets, what they have to chip in financially would be, of course, significantly altered. They'll have to, of course, pay for the buyout, pay for the probably any opt-out or whatever fees might be coming along with that. But, there's certainly space for them to make things work if that's the direction that they want to go. And if that is the direction they want to go, I think there's certainly some potential in some of these guys. And I don't think the Mets are going to have to pay all of a Max Scherzer or a Justin Verlander salary. They're going to have to eat a whole bunch of it. But, I'm hoping that it won't come to that, because that could set things back, considerably if they're not getting the right type of returns back on such, substantial moves.
Yeah, that's for sure here. And let's go the positive direction here. Obviously they're in the middle of their first 3-game winning streak in a month right now as we record. They're playing the Diamondbacks again tonight here. I've said I think the math, in my opinion, is like if they can go 12-8 over the rest of the month, I think they're 3 under, 500 at the deadline. They at least maybe stand pat or maybe do a modest buy. But do you think what we've seen the last few days is a mirage? Every team, every squirrel finds a nut every once in a while, or do you think this could be a sign maybe they're starting to right the ship a little bit?
Well, it's certainly encouraging. what they've been able to do. They look like they're not quitting after a bad inning or a bad first half of the game, or it's a different vibe. And playing against Arizona, who's a really, really nice team. That's not just an overachieving team. That's a pretty well put together team with some very, very high end young guys, some extremely competent COD guys. Like you look at Gurriel, I think it's one of the most undersung additions of the offseason. But this is a very pivotal time for the Mets, and whatever they can get and whatever motivation they can kind of muster with wins, whether it's against the against the Giants or the Diamondbacks, you take what you can get and you just kind of build off of it. And I'm somewhat confident that the Mets can kind of snowball what they're doing now into an actual, winning streak. If they can rattle off 12 or 13, the entire vibe of the season changes. Of course, that'll be straddled over an All-Star break, but we've seen teams get ridiculously hot at the right time, and everything changes. Look at the Phillies; they've done it. They did it this year too. Right around the time the calendar changed, just everything kind of kicked into place. And you can't look at other examples, but for the Mets, if you're winning games and you're winning games in exciting or convincing or just consistent fashion, that's just naturally going to turn into more success and more confidence. And as we all know, baseball is, rooted in confidence at the player level, at the team level. If you don't go out there thinking that you can win, chances are you're not going to win. It's just, that's how life goes in most chances. So, I think at the very most basic level, I think the Mets are, have everything in front of them. They have every opportunity in front of them. It's on them to turn things around. And, that clock's ticking very, very loud, and there's not a bunch of time left on that clock. So, it's going to be on them to find motivation and find, just something to keep them rolling. Because, boy, they haven't rolled really rolled at all this season. And that has to change for things to actually change. But I think they can do it. I really do.
Yeah, we'll see if they can pull it off in the next few weeks, Tim. Thanks all the time. Really appreciate it. People want to follow on social media. Keep up with what you're doing for the Mets coverage. How can they do that?
I'm Timothy R. Ryder on Twitter. It's the Apple NYM on Twitter. You could also find us on Substack. Just look for the Apple on Substack. And Simply Amazing is the podcast. You find us on Apple Pods, Spotify, wherever you listen to podcasts, we're there. And Mike, it's really always a pleasure hanging out, and I appreciate you sitting through my long-winded responses.
And I appreciate all the time, Tim. Thanks again.
Have a good one, man. Thank you.